The sound of whispers and muffled laughter filled the air as Sarah Miller pushed open the heavy metal door of the San Diego Navy SEAL training facility. The 35-year-old woman dressed in simple civilian clothes stood out immediately among the sea of muscular men in tactical gear. She clutched her small bag tightly as several heads turned in her direction, eyebrows raised in amusement. "Looks like someone's wife got lost on her way to the grocery store," called out a deep voice, followed by eruptions of laughter. A broad-shouldered recruit deliberately bumped into Sarah as he passed, sending her bag tumbling to the floor, its contents spilling across the polished concrete. The room erupted in more laughter as a water bottle, notebook, and a pair of worn shooting gloves scattered at her feet. Training Officer James Peterson approached with a smirk on his face, towering over her. "Ma'am, I think you've wandered into the wrong building. The visitor center is across the street." More laughter followed, but as Sarah knelt to gather her belongings, something changed in her eyes. A coldness settled over them like frost on a window. Her right hand instinctively reached for the military dog tags hidden beneath her shirt. They had just humiliated the wrong woman. Before you watch the complete story, comment down your country name and don't forget to subscribe. Sarah Miller wasn't supposed to be here, not anymore. A 35-year-old single mother living in a modest home in San Diego, she spent most days working as a financial analyst for a construction company. Her coworkers knew her as quiet, efficient, and intensely private. Nothing in this routine suggested anything extraordinary about Sarah Miller. What these Navy SEAL recruits couldn't see was the woman who had once been Lieutenant Miller, one of the most decorated female marksmen in U.S. Marine Corps history, with 2 tours in Iraq and a service record that most military personnel could only dream of achieving. 4 weeks ago, when Captain Robert Torres, an old commanding officer and family friend, had called with a request, Sarah had initially refused. "We need a civilian marksmanship consultant for the SEAL training program," Torres had explained. "Just 6 weeks, Sarah. These guys need exposure to different techniques, and your experience would be invaluable." She had sworn she would never pick up a weapon again after returning to civilian life 5 years ago. "The war changes you," she had told her daughter during one of their rare conversations about her military past. "It takes pieces of you that you never get back." But when Torres mentioned that her daughter Lily's college scholarship could be fast-tracked through the program for military families if Sarah helped out, she reluctantly agreed. "No special treatment," she insisted. "I want to observe the full program first, understand what these recruits actually need." Torres had hesitated but eventually agreed. Now, standing in the training facility surrounded by mockery, Sarah questioned her decision. Brad Cooper was exactly the kind of man who had always made Sarah wary. At 28, the former college football star carried himself with the cocky assurance of someone who had never faced real consequences for his actions. As the unofficial leader of the SEAL recruits, his opinion carried weight, and he had decided from minute one that Sarah Miller didn't belong. "Seriously, what's next?" Brad whispered loudly to his friends as Sarah took a seat at the back of the classroom. "Are they going to bring in a grandmother to teach us hand-to-hand combat?" Instructor Peterson began the tactical theory course, deliberately ignoring Sarah's presence. When she raised her hand to ask a question about sniper positioning, Peterson glanced at her with barely concealed irritation. "We'll stick to the official training protocols, ma'am. This isn't a beginner's course." "I understand," Sarah replied evenly. "I was actually wondering about the adjustment protocol for wind variables at distances beyond 1,000 yards. The room fell silent for a moment before Peterson cleared his throat. "That's beyond the scope of today's lesson." Brad smirked at his friends, mimicking her question in a high-pitched voice when Peterson turned to write on the whiteboard. What Brad and the others didn't realize was that Sarah had endured far worse during her military career. She had survived firefights that lasted for hours, crawled through terrain so hostile that every movement risked detection, and held dying teammates in her arms while calling in coordinates with perfect precision. These childish taunts barely registered on the scale of hardships she had overcome. Yet she recognized the pattern from her military days: the insecurity masked as superiority, the need to establish dominance through humiliation. She had seen it in every male-dominated space she had ever entered, and just like before, she would overcome it not through confrontation but through excellence. As the days passed, the tension only increased. During the first range session, Peterson assigned Sarah to observe from the sidelines, claiming there wasn't enough equipment for visitors. She sat quietly, taking notes as the recruits practiced with their standard-issue weapons. Brad finished his round with impressive accuracy, hitting 8 out of 10 targets at 200 yards. He turned to his friends, soaking in their praise with a grin. "Not bad for someone who just started advanced training," Peterson commended him. Cooper might be our top shooter this year. Sarah continued writing in her notebook, her face betraying nothing. The next day, a small news article appeared in the local military paper, Civilian Consultants Questioning SEAL Training Standards. The piece carefully avoided direct accusations while insinuating that training requirements were being modified for political correctness rather than combat effectiveness. Sarah read the article during her lunch break, expression unchanged even as she noticed several recruits glancing in her direction, whispering behind their hands. That evening, Sarah found her daughter Lily sitting at the kitchen table, homework spread out in front of her. "Mom, Jason from school showed me an article about your consulting job," Lily said, looking up with concern. "He said his brother is in the program and that you're just there as some kind of publicity stunt." Sarah sat beside Lily, taking her hand. "People fear what they don't understand, honey. Sometimes being different means carrying more weight than others." Lily frowned. "But why do you have to be the one carrying it? It's not fair." Sarah smiled sadly. "The important things rarely are, sweetheart." What Sarah didn't tell her daughter was how the article had reopened wounds from her military days, the same whispers that had followed her through sniper school, the constant need to prove herself worthy of a position that many believed should be reserved for men. The qualification day came 4 weeks into the program. Families and military officials gathered in the observation area, creating an audience that added to the pressure. The shooting qualification would be the final and most heavily weighted portion of their assessment. Brad Cooper was scheduled to shoot last in his group, giving him the advantage of watching others' performances. Sarah had been completely excluded from the roster. As the qualification proceeded, she observed each shooter carefully, noting the wind conditions and the subtle differences in how each recruit approached the course. Several washed out, unable to meet the minimum accuracy requirements despite weeks of training. Others barely passed, their nervousness evident in shaky hands. Brad's turn came after 4 other recruits had posted respectable scores. He moved through the course with practiced precision, his transitions between shooting positions fluid. When the final results flashed on the screen, 88 points out of a possible 100, cheers erupted from his fellow recruits. Brad removed his protective headgear, basking in the applause, then turned to where Sarah sat quietly in the observation area. "I'm sure you could probably handle a .22 at the county fair shooting gallery, ma'am," he called, drawing laughter from his supporters. Captain Torres, who had arrived to observe the qualification, approached Peterson with a deep frown. Their conversation was heated but hushed. Moments later, Peterson walked toward Sarah, his expression a mixture of annoyance and resignation. "Miller," he called out. "Captain Torres insists you participate in the qualification. There's an open slot at the end." A hush fell over the crowd as Sarah stood, her face betraying nothing. "That won't be necessary," she replied calmly. "I'm here as an observer." Torres stepped forward. "It's part of your consultant contract, Sarah. Full participation in at least one qualification round." Sarah met his gaze, understanding passing between them. This had been his plan all along, not just to have her consult but to demonstrate. "Very well," she said quietly, reaching for the equipment bag under her chair. As Sarah stepped up to the starting position, an unexpected hush fell over the spectators. Perhaps it was her posture, suddenly straighter, more commanding than they had seen before. Or perhaps it was the transformation in her eyes. No longer the quiet financial analyst but something harder, more focused. She pulled out her own pair of well-worn shooting gloves, sliding them on with practiced ease. For a brief moment, as she adjusted her stance and lifted the standard-issue rifle, Sarah was transported back to the dusty outposts of Iraq. She could almost hear her old spotter's voice in her earpiece. "Breathing control, Miller. Let the world fade away. It's just you, the weapon, and the target." The buzzer sounded, jarring Sarah back to the present. What happened next would later be described by witnesses as something from an action movie. Sarah moved through the course with a speed and precision that seemed impossible, transitioning between positions with fluid grace, acquiring and neutralizing targets almost faster than the electronic scoring system could register. Her breathing remained steady, her focus absolute. In the observation area, Lily sat forward in her seat, eyes wide as she watched this version of her mother, confident, commanding, unstoppable. When Sarah fired her final round and the buzzer sounded again, the facility fell into stunned silence. The scoreboard flashed, 100 out of 100. Perfect score, perfect execution, completed 15 seconds faster than Brad's run. As Sarah lowered her weapon and removed her protective gear, Captain Torres stepped forward, a small smile playing at his lips. "I believe some introductions are in order," he announced to the silent crowd. Sarah stood at attention, years of military discipline automatically straightening her spine. Torres turned to face the spectators, voice carrying across the range. "For those who don't know, before joining our program as a consultant, Lieutenant Sarah Miller served 2 tours in Iraq as a Marine Corps sniper with the highest qualification rating in her unit's history. During her service, she was awarded multiple commendations for marksmanship, including setting what remains the Marine Corps record for confirmed targets at extreme long range." Sarah reached for the chain around her neck, pulling out the dog tags that had remained hidden throughout her time at the facility. Beside them hung a small medal, the expert marksman badge she had earned 8 years earlier. The silence that followed was deafening. Peterson stood frozen, his planned triumph shattered beyond repair. Brad Cooper's face had drained of color, his earlier bravado evaporated in the face of irrefutable evidence. Sarah spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but carrying across the still range. "I didn't come here to prove anything or to embarrass anyone. I came because these skills matter, they save lives in the field. The enemy doesn't care about your ego or who you think belongs here. They only care if you can make the shot when it counts." She returned the weapon to the equipment table with practiced ease. "If my presence here has been uncomfortable for some of you, I understand. Change usually is." With that, she walked off the range, head held high, as Lily rushed to meet her with amazement in her eyes. "You never told me you were that good," Lily whispered, arms wrapped tightly around her mother's waist. Sarah smiled, stroking her daughter's hair. "Some skills you never lose, sweetheart. They just wait until you need them again." The aftermath unfolded quickly. By the next morning, Peterson had been reassigned to administrative duties pending review. Captain Torres offered Sarah a permanent position as the advanced marksmanship instructor for the program, with a salary that would more than cover Lily's college expenses. Brad Cooper's reckoning came in a more personal form. 3 days after the qualification, he appeared at Sarah's temporary office, eyes downcast. "May I speak with you, ma'am?" he asked, his voice lacking its usual confidence. Sarah gestured to the chair across from her desk. "I've been a complete jerk," he said finally, meeting her eyes. "Not just to you, but it was especially bad with you. I never questioned why I thought you didn't belong here. I just assumed." Sarah studied him carefully, looking for any sign of insincerity. "I don't need your apology, Cooper. What these teams need is for you to be better, to judge people by their skills, not by how they look or where they came from." Brad nodded, swallowing hard. "I want to try. I really do." "Then prove it through actions, not words," Sarah replied. As Brad turned to leave, she added, "And Cooper? Your breathing is throwing off your long-range accuracy. You're anticipating the recoil. Work on that." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you." 6 months later, Sarah stood at the edge of the graduation ceremony for the newest class of Navy SEAL qualifiers. Among them was Brad Cooper, who had not only completed the program but had earned the second highest marksmanship rating in his class. As the ceremony concluded and families rushed forward to congratulate their loved ones, Sarah remained slightly apart, observing with quiet satisfaction. Captain Torres approached, following her gaze to where Brad was introducing a new female recruit to his family. "You've changed things around here, Miller," Torres said. "More than I expected when I asked you to join us." Sarah touched the chain around her neck, considering his words. "I never wanted to return to this world," she admitted. "The weight of a weapon, the responsibility of training others to use lethal force. I thought I'd left that behind for good." She watched as Lily chatted animatedly with some of the younger recruits who had come to respect Sarah's expertise. "But I've realized something important. Sometimes the battles find us whether we're looking for them or not. When they do, what matters isn't how well you fight, but what you're fighting for." As the crowds began to disperse, Sarah found herself face to face with her former students, now standing taller with a confidence built on genuine skill rather than bravado. "Thank you, Instructor Miller," Brad said, others nodding in agreement. "For everything you've taught us." Sarah nodded, acknowledging their gratitude with characteristic reserve. "Remember it when it matters most, when someone tells you that you don't belong or that you're not good enough. Remember that strength isn't about dominating others. It's about standing firm in who you are, even when the world tries to tell you otherwise." The next day, as Sarah prepared for a new class of recruits, she paused at her desk, looking at a photograph Lily had recently framed for her. A group shot of her first graduating class, men and women standing side by side in uniform. Beside it sat a small note that had appeared anonymously in her mailbox. "You've given courage to those who had none. Thank you for showing us what real strength looks like.